Good evening and welcome to this second meeting of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Overview and Scrutiny meeting. I'm Councillor Steve Bartlett and I'm the chair of this board. I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting, all the members, and particularly those that are standing in for others this evening. And in particular, also public that are looking in tonight. And we very much welcome you watching the Overview and Scrutiny Board in action. Now, just before we move on, I'd like to ask our Democratic Services Officer to just give us a little bit of information about the manner of the meeting. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to do so by the Chairman. Always turn on your video function when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and will not have the benefit of the visual. Please mute your microphone whilst not talking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for a motion. Please remember that this panel is visible to all and subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand feature. If a vote is required on any item, the Democratic Services Officer will call out each board member's name, beginning with the Chairman and Vice Chairman, and please respond with a for, against, or abstain. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Claire. Agenda. First, you have apologies, and have apologies for Councillor Dwayne Farr and Councillor Farquhar. Agenda item 2, substitute members. We have substitute members, Councillor Anne Fowler. Good evening, Councillor Farr, and we have Councillor Lewis Allison, who I believe is stepping in for George Farquhar. So welcome to you again, Lewis. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda 5, please. A member of my family was one of the authors of this report, so I will not be taking part in this section of the agenda. Thank
you, Councillor Edwards. I see no other hands raised, so we'll move on to public issues. I'm not aware of any. Claire, are there any?
No, we've not received notification of any public issues, Chairman.
Thank you, Claire. Agenda item 5, scrutiny of regeneration, economy and strategic planning related cabinet reports. The item is relative to the BCP parking standard supplementary planning document, and I'd like to call upon Councillor Mike Green to introduce the paper. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Chairman. This paper brings forward a consistent parking requirements for the whole of the BCP area. It replaces the 3 that were there for the predecessor councils. To get to the main point, where it differs mostly from those predecessor SPDs is that it's replacing, is that it involves a reduction and in some cases an elimination of the parking requirements, particularly for new residential development in town centres and also in district centres, and it does that through a zonal approach. And the reason that that's introduced, well, actually, there's 2 main reasons which are that is being introduced. The first is that, quite bluntly, that the roads around in BCP, or many of them, are already incredibly congested. We will be required to build a lot more dwellings as we go forward over the next few years by the government. And if we allow car ownership to grow at the same sort of rate, then we will find our congested roads become, well, absolutely gridlocked. And that obviously cannot happen for all the economic reasons that are relevant. The second related reason is that it recognises and supports the council's commitment to tackling the climate change and ecological emergency, which again is backed up by government requirement. And as we can see from the next paper that we're going to be looking at this evening, the carbon consequences of transport, and particularly private car transport, are a very, very major constituent in the greenhouse gases, both in BCP area and in the country as a whole. And this paper will help to address that by bringing in lower, or as I said earlier, in some cases, nil requirement for resident car parking when there are new dwellings introduced. And remember, we are required to be introducing more than 2,500 of those a year into the BCP area. As it does that, it will mean that there is a greater and greater proportion of in those areas who do not have access to their own car, and that in itself should push the requirements for improved public transport, and will make routes and frequencies, particularly for public transport, that are not viable at the moment, they should become viable. And where I see this developing is going to be into a virtuous circle where we get increased public transport because of that increased demand that we are helping introduce via this SPD. There is a third reason as well, which I think we probably ought to mention, which is that at the moment, if we want to produce the number of increased dwellings that we're required under the government policies, we will need to be building more primarily in the higher density areas that we have at the moment. And by reducing the requirement for parking on site, that will mean that it becomes much more viable to be including higher numbers of those dwellings on the site, because we don't have to be providing a chunk of that site for car parking. And that should be contribute to taking pressure away from the areas that we would rather maintain as low density, or indeed no density in some cases, by ensuring that the development is concentrated on those areas that are either better served by public transport or which are well served by public transport. So in addition to doing this, there are elements in that report that people have read, which strengthen the requirement for cycle parking on site and dramatically increase the requirement for both provision for car clubs, where we can have shared use of the cars rather than people having to have their own, and also in line with the government's change, very much increased requirement for electric vehicle charging. This has been a cross-party approach to getting into this. The majority of the work was done under the previous administration, and it was led by Councillor Phipps and Councillor Hadley, who I want to thank for involving me in that at the time. And so, as we've moved forward, we've been able to do it in a continuous manner. But certainly, the draft that went out, and there've been very few significant alterations to that, is something that was developed jointly across both the administration and the opposition as was. It went out for 4 weeks of public consultation, and there have been some alterations made to the report as it's come out and through the SPD itself. Appendix 2 includes all the responses that are there to that consultation, and I'm going to reserve speaking about them now, because I think most of them will come out in the questions that your panel will have, Mr. Chairman. But I think there's just one that I would like to mention first of all, because there was some misunderstanding from some resident respondents, although not from the developer respondents, that although the parking requirement may be nil in some areas or small in some areas, that does not mean that the council would not accept an inclusion of those numbers. And it's therefore something that will become market driven. If those who are developing properties think that it is a location where people will be happy to buy or to rent those properties without having access to a car, then providing they are in the right zones, they will be able to build with no provision. If, on the other hand, they believe that the sort of housing that is being built and luxury housing and flats are particularly mentioned within the SPD itself, if they think that's the case, then they would be providing parking. So the fact that they are not required to provide any parking does not mean that they are not able to provide any parking on site. I know that there are going to be several other questions that come forward, which will be similar to those that have been asked by the public in the consultation. And I've got two officers here, Alexis Edwards, who my colleague Councillor Jackie Edwards has already referred to, and Rebecca Landsman, I think, is also on the call, who will be able to assist me in answering the more detailed questions about the report. Very happy to leave it open to your members now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Before the report is very well written. It's a good document, very well presented. Whether you agree with it or not is another matter, but I will congratulate the officers for the work that they've put into it. Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Green. I thank you for this report. I agree that it's a good report. I just have some queries on a particular area, the Twin Sales regeneration area and surrounds, which I'd be grateful if you or the officer could respond to. I can't understand why the power station site, Inland Homes site, Sydenham site, which are just over the Twin Sales and Pool Bridge, are designated as Zone B. They're both within easy walking distance of, or within walking distance of the town centre, maybe even within the 400 metres, and that the regeneration zone, if it's developed well, should in itself be its own community and have many of the resources that people who live there need. I just feel it's shooting ourselves in the foot to some degree as a council if we don't put that area in Zone A. Part of it is the bit of it which is between the bridges site on the town side of the backwaters channel is actually in Zone A, but over the water is Zone B. It would seem to be much more sensible if we said basically everything south and east of the regular rate traffic light should be in Zone A. And the second part of that question was the port is designated as Zone C for some reason. The port is a dead end down, a place where we want to minimise the amount of traffic, i.e. as little as possible non-travelling port traffic. So I just wondered why that is Zone C. Thank you. Councillor Green.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks, Councillor Howell. I think that you're absolutely right to be pointing out that the zonal approach is something which may need a little bit of refinement as we go through. And I think if when it comes to in most things parking, that to claim that we're going to have it 100% right on the first cut is really courting disaster, because we won't. In this particular case, I don't see too much of a problem. I think you're probably right about the Sydenham site, that probably should be in Zone A, and maybe the map isn't quite clear enough on that one. But as we move forward, I think when we're talking about the residential sites, or ones that will be there for residential development, I think it's important to note what the difference is in requirement between Zone A and Zone B, and that's actually very, very small. The only units of accommodation which are different in the requirement between Zone A and Zone B are 2-bedroom houses. If it's 2-bedroom flat, then it doesn't matter whether it's in Zone A or Zone B, it has the same requirement, which is nil. If it is on if it is a 1-bedroom flat, it has no difference. If it is a 3 or more bedroom house, it has no difference. The only location, the only units, and they will be very, very minimal, I think, in number, are 2-bedroom houses, when it was felt that it probably would make sense in Zone B to have an optimum of 1 parking space for those houses which are likely to be occupied by small families in Zone B. The point about the port in Zone C is because it is not expected that there's going to be residential development there, and you'll see that Zone C is described as business hubs, which I think is the right designation for the port area. So I hope that covers those 2 points, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think I think there is also a difference, Chair, in flats as well. 3-bedroom flats, I think, in Zone B require parking space, whereas they don't in Zone A. So, but yeah, I just feel that because of, we should be aiming to make the power station site and surrounds as sustainable as possible, and therefore we should be giving as much flexibility to whoever develops those sites to try and make that happen. Thank you.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go on, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Sorry, of course you're right, Councillor Howe. There are for the 3-bedroom, for the family size units, flats in Zone B. There is the possibility of having a parking space. I believe that flexibility is there as we go forward to decide to have fewer, or in some cases slightly greater numbers. And I think that, to my mind, it is well enough balanced. And I think the power station site, which should indeed be very sustainable, putting it in Zone B is probably the right place for it at the moment. But that doesn't mean that as we go forward that it shouldn't be revised into Zone A. And I absolutely recognise that there will be the opportunity for revisions, both in the zones themselves and around the zones as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Are you okay, Councillor Howe?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Cox, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo what you're saying about the report. I think it's well overdue and very welcome. One query that I did have, which is a bit specialised, is to do with coach parking. I am aware that there was a decision by the former Christchurch Borough Council to move the coach parking in the centre of Christchurch to somewhere fairly remote, and that caused a significant problem for a number of the local traders who felt that coach visitors were being ushered away from Christchurch and therefore from the local shopping centre in Christchurch town. So I just wondered if there was any, I can see there it says to be agreed by the LPA, but is there anything more than that within the report? Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, I can bring in Alexis or Rebecca if you require a little bit more. But again, I think we should point out this is for new development. This is not for general on-street coach parking or car parking. That will be a different. That will be on the traffic side. I can see Councillor Cox nodding on the screen. Is that right? That has satisfied that question for now, Councillor Cox?
It has. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Because I see no more hands up.
Councillor O'Neill's hand is up.
Go ahead, Councillor O'Neill, please.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike, a couple of questions. One is, in the current environment, many bus companies are running at the margin and are suffering with their profitability and investment opportunities. We talk about an improvement and a greater accessibility to routes. What's the time scale on that? And it is particularly important with an ageing population, young families, and those that need to travel to and from work. How do you actually factor in that the bus service will meet the needs and the natural needs of the community?
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Certainly, we're going to be needing to work in very much hand in hand with the bus companies as we go forward over the next few years. And indeed, they've been involved in the drafting of this. I think it's important to note that the big changes that are taking place here are taking place in Zone A and Zone B as far as the residential requirements are concerned. And in doing so, those are the areas which are already served by bus routes. In fact, Zone A, I would say, are so. Obviously, there can be comparisons made at different parts of the country, but overall, the Zone A areas are served quite well. The Zone B areas less well, but they are served by the bus companies. As I said earlier, what I do expect is that as the higher proportion of residents are in those areas, the higher proportion of those residents will not have access to their own car, then the demand for the bus services will automatically increase. And that, I hope, would address the point that you were making earlier in your question, Councillor O'Neill, which is that some of these routes at the moment for the bus companies are just on the margin of viability. When you have a greater market for them, those that will not be able just to jump in the car instead, that should improve that viability, and I would hope would improve both frequency and the routes of those bus companies.
Does that mean that we're applying the stick before delivering the carrot? And what's the timescale?
I think we have to hope that the timescale will work in itself. The bus companies have the flexibility to be able to moving up and down as we move through time, and I think that they will do that. Certainly the discussions that I've been having with them are that they will welcome this, and I think we would find them to be really quite reactive. We're probably talking about planning applications that come in once this is developed, or certainly the sizable ones, are probably taking 2 to 3 years until they're completed. At least, and the cumulative effect is probably going to take even longer. So there should be plenty of time for the bus companies to be able to pull this through. Our transport plans, we're probably looking really over the next 15 to 20 years, but I think that we will see those changes happening quite a lot faster than that.
Thank you. And if I might ask my second question, Chairman.
Of course, carry on.
Thank you. Yeah. There's a timescale to this, but along with rates, parking is a major contributor to BCP finances. Council has repeatedly acknowledged the need to support our retailers and the hospitality sector, much of which is in town centres, and both of which are key employers and contributors to jobs and the local economy. Current circumstances and council finances are difficult, as we know reserves have been released. Therefore, rather than risk much needed income, job security and potentially adding to business insolvencies, particularly in town centres, would it make sense to delay these proposals by a period of months so that the natural erosion through COVID and possibly Brexit takes its course, rather than potentially accelerate further decline?
Councillor Green?
Thank you.
Yeah, I struggle to see why these would work in any way against businesses, particularly in the town centres, because what it would be doing is it would be increasing the number of residents in those town centres who would then be using those businesses, particularly retail. There is nothing in this SPD which affects public parking, and that would be both commuters into those businesses and particularly shoppers coming in. You may have been aware that historically, over the last few months, there had been proposals to reduce down the amount of public car parking in the town centres. That is not something which I favour, and it's not something that I will be pushing forward with unless it is absolutely shown to be justified. But that is incidental to this particular paper. Councillor Bartlett, will you have some questions after this as well?
Yes, I will.
Okay, fantastic. Because there is an area that I just didn't see. That I don't think's quite been picked up yet. I'm sure you'll be there.
The reason I asked the question, Councillor Green, is that rely on not just the people living in the town centre, and yes, we may well add to the numbers, but that depends very much on the purchase opportunity. But there are many that travel into the town centres by their own vehicles because there is no choice or because there is a need, particularly when it's inclement weather. The hospitality sector, particularly the restaurant trade, already complains about no shows, which has been quite significant to them during COVID, during the 50-50 Chancellor's meal promotion. I don't see that changing. Are you saying that town centre occupation will offset any risk of loss from the natural course of business?
No, I'm not. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I respond?
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see that the two are directly related in that way, Councillor O'Neill. I think what we do have in table 18 and also table 17 of the SPD itself, I think they're pages 37 and 38, is that it makes it very clear that as new retail or as new hospitality or stuff that's converted to it come on, that they will not be required to provide parking on site in Zone A and Zone B. And I think that should help their profitability and help what at the moment is their opportunity to survive. So I would see that overall, I would see these being a significant positive to the retail and hospitality industries in the town centres and the district centres. And for that reason, I think that I would certainly want to see it brought forward as quickly as possible. Okay,
and just a slight question to that. Bournemouth and its town centre and the beach, the pier area, are both, within a few hundred yards of each other. How will we cater in that scenario for visitors, which are an important contributor to the restaurant hospitality sector?
Go ahead, Councillor Green, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Again, I point out there is no change to public car parking here. So I would expect, and there is no on-street parking available in those areas either. So I wouldn't see that as changing in any way, and I would very much hope that it wouldn't.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Green. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Slade. I now see you. Councillor David Kelsey was actually there, I think, before you. Oh no, I'm saying no. Councillor Vicky Slade. Sorry, Councillor Kelsey, you'll be after Councillor Slade. Councillor Slade, you'd like to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartlett. I just want to get my head around this. This is the parking standards SPD as opposed to the car parking review. It would be good to get an update on where we are with that, because I'm really concerned with the change with COVID that we may have to completely rethink, particularly our district car parking charges, and then the town centre. Just really rethinking whether we can rely on those incomes going forward. So I'd be interested in knowing what the timescale is for that. But specifically around this parking standards, I've got a couple of questions. One is around the construction of buildings going forward. We talked at some length when we were looking at the Lansdowne developments about constructing future car parking or future properties with car parking that could be converted into other uses as the use of car parks reduced in town centre living. I wonder whether there was any more to say on that, and how we might look to plan for a generational drop in the need, rather than build stuff now that's then obsolete. The second thing is around the impact of no on-site parking for Zone 1 and the impact that has on local residents, because certainly if I look at my own ward, the biggest complaints I get is of people who work in the town centre. The employer doesn't have to provide any parking, which is great because that's not a cost to them, but then their roads are clogged up with parking and they get frustrated. And a linked question to that is around the government consultation on banning pavement parking, which has just concluded. I didn't know whether in your working group there had been any conversation about the likelihood of a change to policy, which might see whole swathes of our community need to have double yellow lines on one side of the road because pavement parking will no longer be allowed, and therefore you can't physically park as people do at the moment. I didn't know whether you'd given that any consideration. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Slade. The review, I think we need to take the review on the car parking in the town centre outside this, because it is very difficult, but I can assure you that it is going ahead at pace, and that I'm working with members of the opposition at the same time as within the administration. The construction of buildings in the Zone A with car parks that could therefore later be used. I'm hoping that this has overtaken it, because my assumption is, and I may be wrong, but my assumption is that the majority of developers will look at this and say, you know what, we believe that people will be prepared to live in the town centres, particularly these Zone A better connected areas, that they will not require their own car there, and they will be much happier to be buying or renting a property that's 40, 50, 60,000 pounds cheaper, rather than having to have a parking space. So I am hopeful as we go forward, and certainly the discussions or certainly the responses that we've had from developers as we've been putting this forward seem to be that that's what will happen. And so I believe that we will not have the situation where car parks are built and left empty, because I just don't think that those car parks are going to be built, and I think that's something that we are all going to welcome. Now, when we come to actually, if I can just, before going on to the your point about people coming up and filling up the residential streets, although there's very few of them that are included within the Zone A that actually have parking allowed in those at the moment. I think it's probably more relevant really to Zone B actually than it is to Zone A and stuff which is on the outskirts of those Zone A and Zone B. If I just mention on pavement parking, that's something which in my previous role I've been approaching ministers about, and I think is being done by pretty much every council outside outside London, where the bans are already in place, and it's something which we'll very much welcome. We would expect that there will be the opportunity to allow pavement parking for local authorities to be given the opportunity to allow pavement parking in places which are suitable for that, because it's clearly much cheaper to allow one wheel on the pavement than it is to widen the carriageway and to change the curb. So providing that there is then full accessibility, the remaining footway remains wide enough, and it really does have to be wide enough, not just wide enough to allow people through, then including on mobility scooters, where they're on pavement, including push chairs, including wheelchairs, then I would hope that we would be able to use the exceptions. There'll be very few of them in BCP, where we would be able to allow pavement parking, but it is in many cases it is a scourge, and one that I'm very much looking forward to us being able to get rid of once the government finally gives that approval after so many years of lobbying. But I think you've come to a very important point where residents, and there are an awful lot of them in the consultation responses, particularly in areas like Hamworthy, that said, well, if you're going to be introducing a lot more housing in these areas, and we do have to 2,500 a year across, and some of the places will be receiving that, will be bearing the brunt of that, as we do so, we will need to find a way of ensuring that those residents who are coming into the areas are not then just saying, well, I can park somewhere that's 5 minutes walk away, and so that's going to be fine for me. And that is the other side of the equation, the non-planning side of the equation, which I feel that we're going to need. Well, not only do I feel we need to address it, but I think we want to address it, and that will mean that once when we start to look at the parking, the on-street parking around BCP, particularly in the high stress areas, that we can have a major win for BCP, we can have a major win for residents and a major win in tackling the climate emergency if we start to introduce parking zones, which means that when these developments come on board, they can be specified as either car capped or car free developments. And what that will mean is that, with the exception of those that need it for disability reasons, or those that have a car parking space allocated within the build, because that's the way that the build has been done to do so, that they will not and never will be eligible for a residence parking permit in that zone. So as we go through with the introduction of this SPD, I would hope that quite quickly we will be identifying the areas where we expect this to cause a potential problem for residents as far as parking stress is concerned, and to be designating those as restricted parking zones, so that existing residents are able to park as they have, but the people who are choosing to buy those properties without the on-street parking, not people who already are in that situation, but the new people who make that choice, will never be able to take up that parking space that is there for the residents as being used. That is the way that we are really going to make the progress as we go forward. We're going to be able to build those housing numbers, and we're going to be able to challenge the congestion and drive up the demand for the sustainable transport, which is what this is all about.
Okay, Councillor Slade. Okay, you're smiling, so you seem to be.
Thank you very much. That was. I just asked, do we know when we're expecting the car parking review to come back to Cabinet? Are we talking within the next 3 months?
Chairman, is it okay to?
Yes, please do, Councillor Green.
I think My gut feeling, Councillor Slade, is that the parking review will actually become a series of smaller parking reviews. I'm less wedded to doing a big bang rather than something that works well. And again, I'll come back, even when we start to talk about parking zones, even more than on this planning policy, we just will not get it right first time. We probably won't get it right the second time or the third time. And it's something that we will need to work on and constantly work on to refine as we go through. There are places in London that I think still haven't got it right after 25 years of this, and that's the way it will be. And one of the things I should have said already when it comes to changing around the zones, partly in response to Councillor Howell's question earlier, but certainly in regards to this, is many of you will already have seen that I'm in favour of very, very early consultation with ward councillors who I think understand their areas so much better than anybody else does. So my approach is going to be to include ward councillors on a confidential basis where it's needed, but to ensure that we get bespoke positions and bespoke policies and arrangements which fit in with the general plan, but work best for their residents and their businesses. And so you will see a much earlier and more consistent engagement with ward councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor David Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, nicked a couple of my things that I was going to talk about. I knew I should have gone first, but I'll let her off on this occasion. I fully agree with her talking about pavement parking. My ward particular, the roads are so narrow, it's an absolute nightmare for that. I'm really glad that this SPD is now coming forward. It will make life a lot easier for us all, particularly on the planning board, that we can work from one hymn sheet now rather than three. So that will make life a lot easier there for everyone moving forward with that. There was a couple of minor points that I wanted to talk about, not really connected with this, but they are in another way. We talk about residents parking and having the different zones. That's all well and good, but are we still going to be charging the residents for this privilege of being able to park in their roads and in their particular areas? Because at the moment, particularly in my ward, several roads have wanted residents parking and are then retreated when they've realised what the costs of this is. Are we going to be imposing this, or is it still going to be a voluntary thing, Mike, please?
Councillor Green.
Thank you. I think, well, obviously we're going to be wanting to discuss this with ward councillors, so I'm sure we'll want to discuss it with their residents. What we've had to date is that there's been very few areas that have actually qualified to be able to have residents parking. As we introduce the parking zones, will change, and they will finally be able to get there. As for the charging for residents parking, I would expect them to be very reasonable. It is something that will need to be discussed as we go forward, but I do. Again, you look into some of the boroughs that start sort of £300-400 for a parking permit. I think that we will be absolutely nowhere near that, and we will need to ensure that it will cover the administrative costs. It will, to my mind, it should potentially also start to contribute towards higher enforcement, because that's an area that I think that we really haven't got to grips with in the past, and that includes both the predecessor councils to some extent, as well as the first 18 months or so of BCP. That I would like to see increased enforcement resources, and that's something which can be paid for out of these parking zones. How we get the balance between whether it's pure residents or whether there is residents plus some plus a little bit of commuter parking, or whether we also allow effectively overflow parking, but maybe at a slightly more expensive rate than if people were to use the car parks. All that is something that needs to come out with a wash, and again will require refining and refining and refining as we go through. But I think that it will be a win for residents who have had this problem for so many years.
Thanks for that one, Mike. Can I ask another one, please, Chairman?
Go on, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah. On another one, Mike, town centre with the building of flats and that, I know it works very well in Portsmouth. You go around Gunwharf Quays and none of the blocks of flats have car parking. As you know, I was always totally against taking parking away, but I'm actually almost converted now. Not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. But what I do worry is that where we have public car parking in town centres, and I have seen this in one development of late, where the residents of a nearby development end up buying parking permits for the nearby car park, thus rendering that car park totally useless for any members of the public to use because residents have already got all the spaces. What are we going to do to try and stop that from happening? Because if it doesn't stop, then visitors to the town centres are going to have nowhere to park, because residents would have already taken them up by buying parking permits and getting around the fact that their properties don't have parking with them.
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Dave. Dave, if I've almost won you round, then there is definitely a cause for optimism as we go forward. You are absolutely right that this is something that needs to be looked at. I don't believe that it is beyond the wit of ourselves as a council to be able to get this right. There are car parks in BCP at the moment where we let certain residents in a certain area have discounted annual parking for those car parks. Whether we restrict that, we've always left it with the option for the council to be able to remove that, so it is there as a paid for privilege, but not one that is there in perpetuity. And I would expect, but I will need to get verified, that if we introduce a car-free development or a car cap development, which is exactly the same, but it has some parking on site, that again, we would ensure that the residents of those new properties are never eligible to buy a discounted parking permit for a public car park. It is absolutely something that we need to get right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Millie-Earl, please.
Yeah. My question is more of a process one and more from my understanding, just so I can get my head around it. So in Poole Local Plan, we have the sustainable public transport corridors at the moment. And I wanted to ask, do the zones sort of replace that, or do we need to wait for the new local plan? What's the relationship? Like, which one should we go to if we have an issue?
Chairman? Is it okay if you ask, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Well, when I say to answer, actually the answer is that I don't know on that one. I thought that the sustainable public transport corridors were governed by TROs rather than by planning. If I'm wrong on that, if maybe one of the officers wants to come in which case there should be no contradiction between them and effectively no priority between the two. I don't see either of the officers indicating, so I think that's probably correct.
Sorry, Councillor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can see. Is that Alexis?
Yeah, Alexis Edwards here. Essentially, the sustainable transport corridors, prime transport corridors, or whatever you are referred to in the three predecessor local plans, they're all very similar policies, set out areas where development is encouraged through a spatial strategy. We have not entirely used the same approach with our zones. We've actually looked at district centres, so where there is shopping as well as public transport accessibility. They are related, but they're not quite the same thing. So when you're determining a planning application, the parking would come from this document, but its spatial location would relate to the original core strategy. Does that clarify? Perfect,
thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no more hands raised, so well, sorry, Councillor Slade.
Yeah, you've got me.
please, can I have another go? I've just something that was said that's worried me a little bit.
Okay, and then I've got Councillor Anne Filer also has raised her hand. So if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, it's quite a quick one. It's an equalities issue, actually. I'm a little bit concerned. I love the concept of somebody chooses to save themselves £50,000 by not having a parking space. I love that concept. It's great. But I have an issue with what does that mean when somebody becomes elderly or disabled or their circumstances change, and we've said you've been banned from being able to have access to parking near where you live. I just wonder what the equalities issues are around that. And secondly, I'm also interested, I don't know if Susan is able to clarify, our monitoring officer, the legal implications of what happens when somebody sells the property on, because it isn't something which most people would be very conscious of. And I don't know, where do we stand legally if a house changes or flat changes hands several times and say, well, hang on a minute, I didn't really understand that. How can you deny me the chance to park? I just wonder if you could help me with that. Thank you.
Chairman, I may be able to.
Yes, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And Susan will come in if I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty happy on it. This moves in. It moves with effectively with the deeds of the property, whether it's or a lease, and it would always come up in search if it is a property which is car capped or car free. This again is something that's been in place for getting on for 20 years now in some boroughs, and it is very well established. Similarly, the situation if somebody becomes eligible for a blue badge, there would then the exception will always be made for blue badge holders. However, I will also be speaking. You'll be able to see that the equalities impact assessment has actually been done on this, but it is something that we will absolutely keep at the forefront as we go through in this, as we should be in all of our policies.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Filer, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So, Mike, I'd like to ask two things. One is a comment which has sprung up since you spoke, and that's regarding this ability to buy car parking spaces on a permanent basis in a car park, and that might be something we look at. I mean, could we look at perhaps having those for evenings so that people who are coming home would have somewhere to park, which would be available to the public in commercial areas to use during the day? It's only a thought. But I just want to be sure I understand exactly what this, because I represent, for those who don't know, I represent the same ward as Dave Kelsey, and it's particularly restricted. It's a Springbourne, and it's very, very near the town centre. So it's within an easy walk of the town centre for anybody who's working there. You know, it's a 10-minute walk. So from what I understood that you said this evening is that new builds, and we do have a lot of small houses, small artisan houses being pulled down and being built into flats, often social housing sort of flats. You're saying this is never, there will be a restriction on them ever being allowed to buy a parking permit in the street that they live in. There's such congestion already that if you get another 20 flats in the street that's already congested, it's very difficult. And I want to know that whether the officers feel this would stand up at appeal. Is it something that's been done somewhere else? Is there a precedence for that? And also, how long can this, I think it's very similar to the question just been asked, but how long could a restriction like this apply in the future? Is it something that perhaps after 10, 15 years would become irrelevant?
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. Both very, very relevant. As far as the buying car parking permits on a permanent basis, and particularly the evening one, there is a balance to be found, because potentially you're absolutely right. It could be that we would like to fill up some of the empty spaces in town centre car parks by offering evening permits. But I think the one thing that we do have to be very careful of there is the whole motivator for bringing this in is to ensure that as we increase our number of houses, that we don't increase the number of cars, or by nowhere near the same extent. So there has got to be a balance that's sought in that, and I think it's something that we'll discuss later. One of the things I think that we need to be absolutely clear of, you use the word permanent basis when you're talking about obviously daytime or just evening, and we would have to be absolutely clear that if somebody does have a permit in exactly the same way as some do at the moment to park in a car park, that is not theirs by right. And if next year we say, well, actually, we need those car parking places for shoppers, or next year we say, actually, we haven't gone as far as we wanted in reducing car use, and therefore we told you at the beginning that you weren't going to be able to rely on that forever, then we will have the right as a council to say you will not be able to renew that, and that needs to be very, very clear. Again, I'll ask if officers have any knowledge greater than I do, but as far as I understand and as far as I know has been happening in the boroughs who have introduced car-free parking, yes, that restriction lasts forever in the same way as other restrictions do on involving a lease or a freehold sale, and it's something that we would like to make sure does last forever, if that's what it is. Springbourne is one of the first places that would spring to mind for me, because absolutely there are a number of properties where one house is going and 10, 15 flats are coming into an area that already has a significant amount of parking stress. And that's exactly the sort of place that you would want to say to new residents coming in, or to new owners, your tenants, if that's what it is, will never be able to have a parking space. And actually, I think they're going to be very happy with that. It's going to mean that they're getting it at a cheaper rent, they're getting it in an area that has bus services, train services, and ones that should be getting better because of the increased demand. I can see that Alexis has indicated, Chairman.
Yeah, I can't see Alexis indicating, so thanks for pointing it out. If you'd like to come in, please. But if you could keep it brief, we've been going for an hour on this one now, and I think we need to start bringing this to a close.
Yeah, just to continue the point, there are a number of other authorities that do restrict at planning stage people's access to resident permit schemes, and they impose that as a land charge, which is in perpetuity. So no matter who owns the property, they're clear through their solicitor that they cannot get access to a residence permit scheme, and they have varying levels of success with that, depending on how effective they've been around their on-street charging regimes.
Thank you. Okay, no one else is indicating now, Councillor Green. So if you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to put to you.
Sorry, Chairman, my hand was up.
Well, it's only just come up. You can come in after.
It's been up here for quite some time.
Okay, all right. If it's quick, then please, Councillor Neal.
Yeah, it's only a quick one, and it's more of a concern about elements of the future, particularly in town centres, because the reduction in parking, availability to parking, particularly in town centres, might be seen as a developer's charter, as developers will see the opportunity for building apartments without or with limited parking facility. Given that BCP does not accept the national minimum space standard, and there's been talk of apartments selling at up to 50k cheaper, does this mean that apartments will not just be 50k cheaper, but 50k smaller or worse in their fitting out? How do we protect that?
Sorry, Chairman, do you want me to?
Yes, please.
I would see this, Chairman, as being independent of the space standards. The one thing that I think you could potentially bring in is if there is no requirement to provide car parking, which indeed in small apartments there probably isn't, even though we insist on it at the moment. that will mean that there is an opportunity for developers not to have to try and squeeze a quart into a pint pot. So I would see the opportunity to cheapen the development because you don't have to provide parking as being more likely that the developer will then provide more space that otherwise would have gone into parking, and that with the price that it makes those buildings then and those dwellings then affordable. So I think that if anything, it should be a small positive. It's at very worst neutral, I think, for that one, Councillor O'Neill.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you may have won over Councillor Kelsey, Councillor Green, but you haven't won over me, and nor have you won over most of the people that responded to the consultation. The vast majority were totally opposed to the proposals, and many people thought it was absolutely craziness taking over. Now, the response in the public consultation in the main seemed to be that the officers were following the corporate strategy in terms of climate change, etc. And I accept that and I understand that exactly. But when you actually look at what is really being proposed in practical terms, it really is a very, very hard hitting and a massive change to what we're used to. Now, if you look at zone A and B, I mean, who in their right mind is going to build a 3 or 4 bedroom house in those zones with no parking? The reason they're buying houses that size is because they've got families, and very often they've got 2 or 3 cars. So the most common complaint that we get on the planning board is that the current parking requirements are still not broad enough. They are too much of a constraint. Now, I understand the very laudable aims of the corporate strategy, but I'm also very understanding of human nature and the human natures and the love affair that they have with cars. Now, we're moving towards electric cars. So here we have a situation where people who do move to the town centre and maybe walk around and catch public transport most of the time to go to and fro, but they still like to own a car for when they want to go somewhere else where public transport isn't available. So what are they going to do? They're actually going to park it, their green electric vehicle on the streets, which are already full up, of course, and there's nowhere to park around the town centre on the highways. The other thing is it pushes cars into the car parks, and we've seen this at Bury Court, where a huge number of the residents now, because there's insufficient allocated or unallocated to the development, and now have got permits to use the public car park. And I can see more of this where in the future, residents will be forced, because there's no parking on their accommodation or on the street, will be forced to go to public car parks and will take it up. And I mean, we see this already where students, for example, their students are not allowed to have cars. And so what do? They drive to wherever and they park it and leave it on the street, for days and days and weeks on end. The other issue is around HMOs in particular. You're an HMO, Surrey generous HMO with 6 or more occupants in it. The probability of none of them having a car and having nowhere to park, they will ultimately park on the streets. Visitors, where are visitors going to go? And we're talking about visitors to the developments themselves. They're obviously going to have to park on the roadside. The other issue is about how do we manage those people already living in accommodation that do own cars and will not be allowed to park in the area where they've traditionally parked for years because they won't have access to a permit. So I have so many questions, but in the broader sense, I think whilst there's laudable aims of the policy, it's going just too far too quickly. And I think that we've really got to look at zone A and B and be a little bit more circumspect in just how far it's being pushed so quickly. And I really suspect this, Councillor Green, that the most people are living in and around the town will hold the same view. And many of them will think that, this policy is absolutely crazy. But anyway, that's my view. And if you'd like to come back, you probably would like to, and probably use 2 words in doing so. So I would invite you to come back. But if we could then move on and close this one down, because we've been at it for over an hour. This is just like a planning board. We spend all of our time talking about parking.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was. I must admit, it is probably the first time that I read through the consultation results and find suggestions that I must be campaigning for Extinction Rebellion. It's not one that I've been accused of many times before, but so it is. You point out, Mr. Chairman, that this could be a big change, and the answer is yes, it is. It is a big change. It is a big change that is guided by our corporate strategy. It is a big change that is guided by government strategy. It is a big change because a big change is necessary to tackle the congestion that we have here and the increased congestion that we would absolutely have if we allow cars to continue to grow with the new with the increasing in housing that we've got. And it is a big change because it is the right thing to do in a climate emergency to prevent the item or to try to restrict the item which contributes such as we know in BCP and around the country, the transport is the major contributor to greenhouse gases. So yes, it is a very big thing to do. Coming to some of the individual questions that you had in there, you're asking about what would happen to the person you're saying no one in their right mind would want to buy a 3 to 4 bedroom house in a town centre with no parking, and you may well be right, and that's why it's up to the market to decide that, because there is the opportunity for a developer to say, you know what, I know I don't have to provide any parking here, but if I want to sell this 3 or 4 bedroom house, and actually there aren't that many of them that are being built in the zones A, I have to say, but if I want to do that, then I will need to provide parking, and there is the flexibility to be able to do that. So the policy as we have written will allow that to take place. The other thing that I point out for when you're talking about people who will occasionally want to be able to have their car to be able to do the long journey. One thing that we haven't considered as we've been going through, there is a significant part in this about introducing car club spaces and the requirement to do so when we're looking at larger developments. And I believe personally that that is the way that we will be moving forward. There will be the opportunity for somebody to use a car, but not all the time. And certainly for it not to be their first choice to do so. But when these car club bays, I think we're talking about, I'm just going to try, I think it's section 3, if I remember, I may be wrong. There is
Sorry, it's on page 47 of the bundle for tonight's papers.
There you go. On page 47, the requirements are there for car club provision that will be required as we go forward for all of the larger developments, and that is something that I think that we will potentially even possibly exhaust and need to look at different ways, because I think people will be very happy to be providing those, and I think it will become the norm for town centre livers as we go forward. The questions you were asking about student accommodation, sui generis HMOs, and residents who won't be able to park when they always have in the past on these streets, I think all should be tackled by the answer about these resident parking zones, the bit that is not in this paper because it's traffic related rather than planning related, but it certainly will need to go hand in hand. And as I answered to Councillor Slade earlier, this is something that will need to develop over the course of the coming months and years, and we have to accept that we won't get it right the first time. But I believe that it is the way forward. It will be the way to avoid congestion as we go into the future, and it will make it right for our residents, our visitors and our businesses, allowing us to hit the housing targets at the same time. So I think it's a really good way forward. I just before I do close, Mr. Chairman, I'd really like to thank the members of this panel for what I think has been some of the best questioning that we've heard for a long time. It's been directed. It's been it's been intelligent questioning. It's made me think about it, and the more I think about it, I think it's the right thing for us to be doing. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. One of the things for sure, the developing community will be ecstatic about it. Having said that, I think there's no one else wants to put their hand up, so we'll move on to agenda item. Which one is it next? 6. Climate Action Annual Report, and I believe you're presenting this one as well, Councillor Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully we can be a little bit swifter through this one. Like the previous paper, it's been very much a collaborative effort to get here from a cross-party basis, and those who were involved in this previously will see that it bears a striking resemblance to the draft back at the end of September. And again, there's a reason for that, which is that it's the right thing for us to be doing. It reaffirms our twin commitments as a council. Firstly, for BCP to become carbon neutral by 2030, and secondly, the much bigger target, which is that BCP as a council area should become carbon neutral by 2050. The cabinet paper that you have here reports on what we've been doing to get there and what we are doing to get there. Within that 2030 commitment, it shows that clearly the area that we want to concentrate on is going to be buildings, in that they account for 60% of the council emissions of carbon at the moment, with heating, electricity and transport making up a further 30%. When we look at the 2050 commitment for BCP as an area as a whole, we see there that it's 60% of that of those emissions come from gas use and also from road transport fuel. And again, that's where we're going to want to work collaboratively with other players in this to be able to ensure that we get here. How can I put it? As we go forward, as I said, this is very much a continuation of what we have been doing, and the report probably really speaks for itself when it talks about the individual items. But there are 2 particular items which I'd like to point out that we are bringing forward, having stalled unfortunately over the last year. The first is the establishment of a climate action leadership board, in which the council will be part of it, but recognises that the real target isn't just the 41,000 odd tonnes that the council is producing of carbon emissions. It's the million tonnes plus that BCP as an area is. So that would be a leadership board which comprises of major businesses, of the universities, the Port Pool, all those that can be involved in trying to find our way forward as an area. And the second one is the public engagement survey, which again was promised last year and for various reasons hasn't been able to come forward. And that is the one that will go out to all residents and interested parties. I'm asking that this is launched on the Cabinet to launch it immediately. That consultation will then last for 8 weeks and should when we get the results back from that, should help guide us as we put forward our policies and our action plan for moving forward to that 2050 target for carbon neutrality for the whole of the area. And what I intend to do on that is, as soon as we've got those results back and they've been compiled, I will then be looking to hold an all-member workshop so that members of the cabinet members of the council will be able to get involved in this, and we'll then work out how we're going to be moving forward to ensure that the members right the way across the council are continually involved for this absolutely vital action plan that we develop and will continue to develop over the following years. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Members, now I can't see any hands raised, but it might be because my thing is not working properly.
Chairman, I can see one from Councillor Cox, if that helps.
Okay, Councillor Cox. Thank you. Right now, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I welcome the report. I claim to be a little bit disappointed insofar as I think the words Councillor Green has quite rightly used were very good. Actually, you know, they sound good, but I'm slightly confused as to where I thought there already was an action plan in place. I thought there was 153, was it, items and a previous action plan. Has that been dismissed now, and are we doing a new consultation with a new action plan? Because I thought the previous action plan had a lot of good ideas with it, and it would be useful to see what progress really has been made on that, if possible.
Yeah, I'm very happy if I can, Chairman. I'm disappointed that you're disappointed, Councillor Cox, when it comes from that. That action plan was the one that was the 153-point action plan was the one that in 2019 was approved for consultation, and that is the one where the consultation has been delayed. That consisted of 100 actions for the council to reduce its own emissions in line with our 2030 target, and a further 53 proposed actions that the council could work with partners to achieve the 2050 target. Over that time, it's been primarily in the first half of this year that those internal actions have been considered by the Directors' Climate Action Steering Group. Some already have been completed, so they're obviously disappearing from the list, and others, as was always going to be the case, are considered as to how we're going to be able to deliver them over the next 10 years. And again, under the previous administration, directors also identified some of those actions which just basically could either be condensed or simplified into others, or which weren't suitable for going forward. So yes, that is very much in line. You will see that it's been considerably condensed on this one as far as the internal plans are concerned. The external proposed actions, those 53, are the ones that are being consulted on as we go forward with this public engagement, which will start on December the 17th. So I think the most important thing on this is nothing out of that 153 has been lost.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, just a follow-up really, it's a suggestion really, is that it would be useful, I think you said a lot of these have already been achieved or been condensed. It would be useful to show that in a report so that people from outside can see that what progress the council is actually achieving. Because I think, you know, we need to be seen to be leading by example, and that would be a good demonstration of how the council could be seen to be doing its bit.
Chairman? Yes. Yeah, thank you. I welcome that suggestion. I think it's a very good one. It was actually not far from the same question. Your first question was not far from the first one that I asked when taking over the portfolio, which was, well, how are we getting on? There is a lot of this report which does identify what's been happening with those 154, those 100 internal ones that we've looked at, but there is no direct mapping. And actually, I think it would be helpful for us to have that mapping available. I can't promise it's going to be available for the December paper. It may be something that we want to take offline and share with councillors who are involved in that and then more generally. But it is certainly something that I think makes a great deal of sense, Councillor Cox, and thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Kelsey, I saw you flaying your arms around wildly just now. But you haven't put your hand up, have you?
No, not at all, Chairman. I was playing my hands around wildly to get rid of the smoke from a burning cake in my kitchen.
Oh, okay, thank you. In that case, Councillor Chris Rigby, please. And then that's followed by Councillor Edwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Green, if you're disappointed that Councillor Cox was disappointed, I think you'll be equally, if not more, disappointed that I'm also disappointed in this. But let me start with the good bits that I like in it first. And it's in the cover report. Point number 3, it talks a little bit about how early 2020 saw the largest global reduction in greenhouse gas emissions due to the pandemic. And that paragraph goes on and it says, but to meet global climate objectives of limiting global warming to below 2 degrees centigrade, this level of carbon reduction must be exceeded year on year, which is a great ambition. We then go into this annual report, which doesn't give us any guidance or doesn't tell us in any way about how this is going to be achieved. What Councillor Cox said about us having this timeline, which we can look at, where we can marry up what we've already achieved so far to where our ambitions are for the next year and the following years, and how we're going to hit our targets, would be really beneficial. If I can go on, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, back when we originally brought this in 2019, we were going to measure the progress by the tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. But nowhere in this report have we actually got that measured up against what's actually been achieved. So it'd be really good to be able to see that and get a report on that. And where that isn't achievable, because obviously some actions don't have tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, it'd be good to see a reason why that can't be equated and what benefit there is, such as the reductions in plastic and waste, which are talked about further down in the report. Going a little bit further into, unless you want to come back on any of that to start with, and I can go on a little bit further on. No one else has got the hands raised at the moment.
If it's all right, Chairman, I'm happy to wait for Councillor Rigby to finish.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind carrying on, please, Councillor Rigby, so that Councillor Green can come back to you on all the points at one time.
Absolutely no problem. You'll have to forgive me looking at about 3 different screens here while I go through my notes.
I'm doing the same, Councillor Rigby.
Cool. Moving on to the report itself. In there, we've got there's a lot of good points in it. There are a lot of good things which have been picked up on it. But an issue I've got with this report, and it's an issue I've had with council reports over the years, is it's needlessly wordy, and you have to drill down through a lot of text to get to the real detail of it, whereas we could have something which was much easier to see. And as this is one of the biggest issues in your portfolio on facing us, it'd be really good to just have something, you know, really visual in graphs and timelines which we can look at. So that'd really be appreciated next time this comes forward. And there's a little bit in it about waste and what we've been doing there, minimising and reducing the use of single plastics, encouraging alternative materials through our retail operations. Again, detail on how we've been doing that, how we've been encouraging others to do that would be really great. There's one other bit on waste as well, which I'll touch on because I'm sure other people will come in with other bits and pieces. And it's it talks about, sorry, excuse me a moment, there it is. It's page 22, and it says investigate opportunities for local additional waste treatment facilities, which it's just a point really that just because something's local, it may not be the best option which we've got. So it's always good to explore further afield and see which is actually the most sustainable ways to go about treating our waste, and what we're doing and where we can reduce it as well. And there's one other bit on waste as well, which I'll touch on because I'm sure other people will come in with other bits and pieces. And it's just in summary, a lot of what we've been saying in this, a lot of the words that I was talking about are encourage or continue the work started, or strategize on, etc. It'd be really nice to see something we are going to implement or we will start. There's not a lot of commitment which we could follow, and it'd be really good to see some positive commitment come in. And again, I feel like I keep repeating the same thing, that we can have as a target and we can tick off as we're going down that list. And if we miss these things, it's not to say, why haven't we done that? It's to hold the hands up and say, great, this hasn't happened because X, Y, and Z. So that's most of my comments, really. If I can get a bit of feedback, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Rigby, I sort of see where you're coming from on some of this, and I'm trying my best to be as collaborative as possible. But there are two parts to our climate action. What this report is addressing, this is the annual report on what has happened over the last 12 months. I agree with you that it's disappointing that not more has happened over the last 12 months, and I would hope that over the next 12 months more will happen, and that we'll be able to do that on a collaborative and cross-party basis. And I think you can see that I'm trying to make sure that we're looking forward and working together rather than criticising anything that may have happened over the past 12 to 18 months. There is an element in the report on the next steps. I think it is important not to muddle up what is an annual report of the last 12 months and an action plan, which is what we'll be taking forward. This is a report on what has happened over the last 12 months. It does include elements on next steps. And when we come back in 12 months' time with the next annual report, because there will be one, it's called annual report for a reason, and I will make sure that there is one. And I hope at that stage that we will be genuinely showing the advances that have taken place over the course of 2021, or the period up until the report comes to Cabinet again next year. The point about showing the target or how many tonnes has been saved in carbon, I think is a very important one, and it has in fact been included for the big change that has taken place, and that's been the greening of the energy tariff. So if you look on that, it is in the report how much that would have saved and where it came through as part of the year. As far as the graphs are concerned, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion to take forward. I actually think that the graphs that are in there give a really good understanding as to the areas that we have to tackle. So I'm pretty happy with the report as it's written here. I think that we will see considerable advances over the next year. I think the big difference that we as a council have to show, I won't use the word administration, but as a council, is we have to show that we are prepared to walk the walk as well as just talk the talk. And it may be that in formative stages that hasn't been possible. I believe it will be possible from now on.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Rigby.
Yeah, that's great. If I can just ask one final question, it's a really quick one. Do you have a idea of a timeline in mind for when we'll be able to see the action plan that's going to be coming forward for next year?
I would. Okay, Chairman. Yep. As I said, the consultation is going to be starting on December 17th. This is a consultation that obviously we would have liked to have started in January, February of this year, but didn't happen. as it comes forward, when that comes back, it's going to be an 8-week consultation. As soon as the results can be compiled, that's when I want to hold the all-member workshop, so we can get that together. We may need to form some subgroups to be able to work further on it, but I would hope that it would then be developed in a collaborative way as soon as possible, so that we can get something that we're all happy with, and that we can go back to the public and say, you said this, we listened, this is what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a comment and a question, if that's okay. Firstly, my comment on item 74, working together, work with stakeholders. I wondered if we could include schools with this, because they are high energy users, and I would like to see them involved in some of our climate projects, if that's okay. And my other one is a question on air quality. We're always being told about cars and lorries and buses adding to the quality of our air. But I just wondered, with this increase of log burners, how we will ensure they don't add to our air pollution. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I can answer the log burners question at the moment, although maybe one of the officers will be able. As we move forward with our partners, I would hope that we'll be addressing all of these issues, because we've all got the same problem. As far as whether schools should be involved, absolutely. Again, I would hope that we'll be able to set up that leadership board at the earliest opportunity, and you can see that that's something that I brought forward on this report. I don't think we need to. Originally, the thought was we needed to wait until the public engagement consultation to come back, and the officers subject to approval at cabinet, that we do not wait for that, because who in their right mind is going to say you shouldn't be getting together and doing the work? We clearly ought to be doing that. Yes, personally, I would like to see some sort of education, some schools involved in it, and not just from the point of view that you mentioned, Councillor Edwards, that they are a user of carbon, but also because we are educating, that we will be educating as we move forward, and so having them involved at that early stage will, I'm sure, lead to them being more aware and contributing more to the fight against climate change as we move forward into the future. This is not something which is going to be sorted out in a year. It's not something that's going to be sorted out in council. 2050 is an ambitious target. It's a realistic target for the area. It's something that we are going to have to work on and work on collectively in the next 30 years to make sure we actually achieve it.
Right, Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Just to let you know, I'm not receiving the hands up, but I am aware that on the list at the moment, we've got next is Councillor Slade, and then Councillor Howell, and then Councillor Earl. And it looks like Councillor Allison has also just indicated. So we've got 4 more speakers. So Councillor Slade, please.
Thank you very much. Councillor Green, I'm really sorry. I don't want to be disappointed that you're going to be disappointed. So I'm going to actually do a sandwich of some great stuff and some stuff that could be improved. I don't know which way around. I too am really, really disappointed in the presentation. Now, I know that you're going to say that this is pretty much what was a draft under the previous administration, and I accept that completely. My defence of that is that had it come to me in Cabinet CMB, I'd have said this isn't user-friendly enough. And therefore I probably wouldn't have let it get to this far. So I think the content of this is pretty okay. But because I've seen the public's comments on this report already, and they're not overly positive, and I think it's partly because of the presentation, because I think contrary to what you just said earlier, I think we've made some really good strides, bearing in mind the unique circumstances of 2020. And I think if we had here's 153 things we said a year ago, and my goodness, 20 of them are done, and 20 of them are cancelled, and the others are on various scales of getting there, I think that would be a really good story to tell. But because it's so narrative, it's incredibly difficult to read and find that good stuff. So I think that in a way you've missed a trick in terms of its presentation. And so that's why I agree that we should have a very straightforward 153-point plan that is clear. A couple of things I'm particularly frustrated about. The first is the lack of comment throughout the whole paper about member engagement, whether that be in the member working group, which I know was closed down, and you've talked about having something new, but that's not really in the report. So I'm not assured, and I can't assure my residents that I'm going to have any input because it's not mentioned. The other thing around some of the work on planting and things like that, there's no mention of working with members to make sure that we've got the communities on board and that we're leading our communities in that work. So again, I'd have liked to have seen more around the members on that. The schools issue, I think we've got a leadership role in terms of connecting the dots for those schools to provide the solar energy and things like that. So I think there is a job for us there. But I love the climate bond. And I know that was mentioned in the Reset for All. It was something that I'd been talking to one of the officers about, how taxi drivers and people who are passengers in vehicles could try to offset their journey, and we could use that for a local climate project. It was a fabulous guy called Adrian Hamling that came to see me about that. Neil was taking that forward. We were looking to do something similar around the air show, how you offset with a local energy project. So I think this is a great idea, and I'd like to see that explored more. The other bit I'm a little bit disappointed with is around the talk about 2050. 2050 is not good enough, because I know when we started this journey and we asked Neil Short and Roxy to do the work to see to benchmark where we were, they were of the opinion that it was feasible, based upon the current trajectory, to achieve climate neutrality for the BCP area by 2042. They were quite understandably reluctant to put that in the plan, but it feels like we've taken our foot off the gas a bit, and talking about 2050 is really lacking in ambition. I'd like to have seen it to say there is a legal requirement we do it by 2050, but we should be aiming for being more ambitious. And I think if the report was written in a more accessible and inclusive way to the public, we could celebrate the achievements a lot better rather than having to go looking for it. So there's some great content in there, but it's like a B+.
Councillor Green with a B+, that's not bad, is it?
Well, I was just going to say, actually, to be honest, Chairman, to get a B+ from Councillor Slade, I'm considering as a pretty happy situation. I do understand about some of the frustration, and I would like publicly to thank those members who have been involved in this, including my predecessors. So I think it certainly hasn't just been a one lady show in bringing us to this level. When it comes round to, and actually, when it comes round to it, first of all, I will take full responsibility for the presentation. Yes, it was very much along the lines of how drafts have been written before I took on the responsibility for it. But maybe because I live and breathe it, I find it a lot more readable than other people do. So I do absolutely accept that, and I take the responsibility. And one of the things that I didn't do sufficiently in the last paper, but I would like to do now, is to thank the particular officers that have helped put this together. Roxy King, Neil Short, Ian Pulteney, who've been able to put this into something which we may debate about the readability, and I will bow to that. But I think that if I have to choose in the end between getting the content right and the presentation wrong, or the other way around, I want to get the content right. This means more than shouting about it. It's, as I answered to Councillor Rigby earlier, we need to show that we walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So I do take on all those comments that Councillor Slade has made, and will ensure that I get better than a B+ for presentation next time.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I must say it's lovely to hear some very constructive comments coming from members this evening, as Councillor Rigby came up with some really good ones to do, and Councillor Edwards, indeed. They've all been very constructive. It's nice to hear a debate being carried out in that way. Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to hear that the port.
Councillor Howell, you've disappeared from sound. Audio is now switched off. That's better. No,
Switching itself.
It's better.
Okay, we are. That should be okay. Okay, yeah, it's nice to hear that the portfolio holder wants to walk the walk, and this report is, although I back up some of the points about its presentation, I think it shows an enormous amount of work put in by the officers. But I understand there are only 3 actually working on this project, and to actually really drive this forward with the recommendations that you have in this report, clearly there needs to be more resource, officer resource put into that, and that means funding needs to be made available by the administration. So perhaps Councillor Green would like to comment on that. It also says at the end of the report, it looks into there's a brief paragraph about investments, and obviously an important part of driving the agenda forward is to have an influence on our partners and influence on the organisations and companies that we invest in. What will be done in order to do that, and will that be extended to influencing the decisions of the pension fund trustees, because obviously we have representatives on that trustee board. And my final point was, I was a bit surprised by, when one looks at the data, that 60-odd% of the emissions come from leased out buildings, but the report doesn't really point, other than just putting a big kind of pie chart there, it doesn't really put any additional stress on that figure. I appreciate that you say this is an assessment rather than an action plan, but it still seems a bit odd to me that there's not more emphasis on how we should begin to map out a way of dealing with the leased out buildings. And indeed, perhaps you could answer the question, do leased out buildings actually fall within the 2030 plan or the 2050 plan? Because obviously they're leased out to third parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Green. Some nice easy ones for you there, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Howell. I'll attack them in reverse order, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned when I introduced the item about the 60% for leased buildings, and I absolutely agree with you that we need to be looking at how we tackle that as the priority, which I did say earlier. It is. Are they included in the 2030 where they're within BCP? Yes, they are. 25 million odd tonnes equivalent of carbon coming from that out of our 43 million. So yes, that they should be included in the 2030. An awful lot of that is council housing, etc. And although we don't have the the absolute control over it. It is something that we have significant influence over. And so, yes, I would see that as being the area that we should be concentrating on. And it was one of the things that jumped out at me when I saw the very first draft of this report before I had any involvement, that clearly that's what we need to be concentrating on. Investments. Here's the one thing that we're probably not all going to agree with today. I think that the question about investments is an awful lot wider. I don't believe we should be debating it this evening, but there are many ways to look at this, and I would not favour trying to influence the pension fund, which after all creates the returns, particularly for our employees, in a fight for this. I believe that as we go forward, we want to do it in a much more collaborative way, and one which brings our staff and everybody else with us, and that probably includes some of the investments or the companies in which investments are made, who are amongst in the forefront of those looking at decarbonisation. So I think we need to be really careful on that. It is a question that we can debate offline, and I think maybe we should debate offline, but it isn't one that I would intend to be bringing forward in the council in the near future. Looking at the sustainability team, they have worked incredibly hard not to create this report, but to set the council on the right path. These are people, obviously, in some cases that I was working with previously, people that you were working with in some cases previously, Councillor Howell. As far as whether we're looking at more resource or more funding, I think we were all disappointed when some of the funding for the sustainability agenda was removed in the emergency budget in the summer. But that's the way we are on it. I am much more interested, though, in basically taking stuff away from the sustainability team rather than loading them up with more. This all comes down to our way of working, and what I want to see, and I think all of us probably do, is that sustainability, the fight against climate change, isn't a department on its own. It's something which just becomes part of the way that not only that we as a council do our business, but that we are encouraging other people to do their business. So I see as we move forward over the next months, probably more the next years, that the sustainability team is going to be more an enabler than it will be about producing results itself. They're a fantastic team, and I think that they're going to be able to live up to that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Howell, there are other people lining up. Are you content?
Just a very quick follow-up, which is, given that council on that last point that the Councillor Green is proposing to take that approach, does he intend? Well, let's just say, I would have thought it would be sensible to have in each department a designated person that was responsible for the climate change agenda, and ensuring that somebody who's in there and has responsibility to make sure that department is living up to the standards that are expected of it, and who can liaise with the core team. That's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, listen to that suggestion. It obviously it isn't a new suggestion, and there are already champions of various description around the sustainability agenda, and there are directors' teams, etc. I can see that in some areas that will be worthwhile, and I'd rather leave it. It to me is an operational decision that should be taken by officers as they go forward in this. But the one thing that I'm really keen on ensuring we avoid is that anybody feels that they can duck their responsibility. And I do sometimes find that if you have one person who is responsible for something within a team, then everyone else says, well, it's being handled, isn't it? This ought to be something that every officer is thinking about every decision they make. Everything they do, keep this in mind. And I don't want that to be abdicated to somebody else.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor, I'd like to move on now, if I may, to Councillor Millie Earl. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Green, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that I'm really quite sad about the Climate Action Working Group not meeting anymore and not being mentioned in the report, as I felt very much that there was some good progress in the subgroups, and it felt very democratic being able to take the residents' suggestions from that first consultation and consider them cross-party. I feel like the members and the public's engagement is so important when dealing with, you know, in some people's minds, like radical changes to tackle climate change, and bringing them along with us so it doesn't feel opposed could have, you know, if we don't do that, it could have very negative consequences, not just for the council, but also for the climate. So I wanted to ask about the survey mentioned in the first recommendation of the paper, which is the next step in that. So in my capacity on the working group, I was quite involved in creating the survey and feeding back with working with Neil and Roxy on it. And I'd really have loved to continue that. But my question is, will we have an opportunity to see it before it's launched in the next week?
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Just turning first of all to the Climate Action Working Group and the groups, I do appreciate the work that was done on them, and obviously I served on them alongside you, but they were running out of steam. In my opinion, we found that, and I answered this in a council question to the public last week actually, that we were not even able to get full membership for some of them, and that just doesn't seem right. I'm not saying it wasn't certain. Well, in fact, again, I said in that answer at council that it was set up for all the right reasons, and the subgroups were set up for all the right reasons, but we had to accept that they weren't functioning to the extent that they should. So there needs to be a way of engaging all members who want to be involved in this, but doing it in a better route. I do not yet know what the best way is. I've actually reached out already to a number of members to say, can we speak about how it might well work better, because I think there is a way. I think we're going to get more information when we get the public information or the public response. We probably will start to form some more ideas, and particularly when we get that workshop of all members, because again it comes back, one of the things on the working group and the subgroup is it comes back to exactly what I was saying on the officers. It sort of felt as though, well, you lot are getting on with that, aren't you? So we don't need to. And not amongst all members, but amongst some members. And I don't think that's a healthy way to go. I've managed to get through all this all this meeting without mentioning the ETROs and tranche one of that. But I think actually it really feeds into it, the thing that you said at the end, Millie, which I absolutely agree with, which is that we have to do this in a way that brings the public with us. We're talking about less, the BCP council, the stuff that we've actually got control over, even including all the leased buildings, is less than 2% of the output of the greenhouse gases. It's just not enough. We have to do this by building up a momentum, not just of those who are interested in it, not those who are the real believers, but of everyone to understand that we have to tackle this together. Otherwise, we are not going to tackle it at all. And those ETROs, because of the way that it was introduced, it set back our agenda. Whether we thought it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do is irrelevant now. But we've now had to step back, and stuff that we probably could have been pushing forward with without too much opposition, we've now got barriers up ahead of us. I do not want us as a council collectively to make the same mistake in this one. It is far too important for us to do so, and involving the public, bringing them with us, making sure even if there's things that we believe or would like to do it right now, if we can't bring people with and it's going to get them to rebel, then that's not the right way to go forward. I think we can. I think amongst the 76 of us, as will be 74 who are there at the moment, we have that collective ability. We are all elected because we are to lead our communities, and that's what we have to do on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Green. Yes, Councillor Earle, you wanted to come back? If you could make it.
I agree, and I think there's always a better way to do something, you know, and I'd very much be interested so we can get involved in that. I think what was great about the working group was that it was cross-party, and it was also very much, you know, the working group was okay. Maybe the subgroup struggled with getting enough members on boards, but that did work. So a lot of us are really, really passionate about this, and I just think there needs to be a very clear way that we can be involved with that, not just as individual members, but also on behalf of residents as well.
Taken on board, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis Allison, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Green, I think really fantastic content in this, and I share colleagues' views that perhaps the issue is presentation versus content, so I'm not going to go over that ground again. I just wanted to clarify with you. So in a previous answer to a question, you said that nothing of the 153 points has been removed. However, I have seen in one of those points was to hold a citizens' assembly. That you've stated that you're not going to have a citizens' assembly. So can I just clarify whether or not that's still on the table, or is it completely gone now?
Councillor Green.
Chairman, I did say that some of them have been addressed and some of them have been removed. The citizens' assembly, as far as I'm concerned, is gone. I do not believe, as I answered again to in question to the public, the funding, which was meant to be £70,000, was removed during the previous administration for the reasons that were stated in it. I agree that it should have been removed. When we have £70,000 to spend, I believe that we should be doing so on something that will actually address climate change and not another opportunity to talk about it. I think Councillor Earle has already pointed out we are elected to represent our residents. We are leading on their behalf and we are working on their behalf. We should be able to do this alongside the leadership group going outside the council. That's where I think it should be. Do I think that we should forget about that £70,000? Absolutely not. But I do want to do something which shows, you know what, here's what we're doing about it. We're not talking the talk, we're walking the walk.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I think everyone's had a good opportunity to talk. It's been a good debate. Lots of stuff that I think that Councillor Green has taken on board. A lot of the suggestions, I guess I'm not sure when this will come back to the committee again, but I hope we don't have to wait a year before we get an update. So, because this is basically an annual report, isn't it? So hopefully it'll come back to us, you know, in maybe 6 months. I don't know if you can just comment on that, Councillor Green, but
sure. Chairman, I would expect that when we get the results of the public consultation, that's when we'll have the all-member group. I would imagine we will then potentially have some subgroups that work together, and officers obviously will be doing a huge amount of work to make sure that is condensed into a 2050 action plan that will go forward. I would expect that would be one that would then come back to Cabinet, and before it comes to Cabinet, it will come to overview and scrutiny. I don't know the exact timing, but my hope would be that if we are getting the consultation results back by the public engagement results back by the middle of February, then we would be able to hold the members group to start it off towards the end of February or the beginning of March. It depends how well we advance as members and as officers to put that into a plan. But my hope would be, and I haven't run this by anybody else at all, that by the summer we should be able to have that that fixed plan that can go forward to cabinet and come to your board beforehand, so that we can get it analysed and hopefully improve it in the same way as I think that the discussion today has improved the action plan report as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Green. It's in the diary now. So I think we've had a really good go at this one. I think I'll draw this debate to a close now. I'd like to move on to agenda item 7 now. Scrutiny of community safety related cabinet report, the domestic abuse strategy. And could I invite the portfolio holder for community safety, Councillor May Haynes, to present the paper to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. So moving on to a topic that's quite different to the 2 previous agenda items. The paper before you is the BCP domestic abuse strategy, and the aim of this paper is to ensure that no resident living or visiting within our council area should live in fear of or experience domestic abuse. The delivery of this strategy sits with the Community Safety Partnership, which was set up back in April 29.
Councillor Haynes, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're getting a lot of breakthrough, and we're not actually hearing what you're.
So just before we move on, just explain to those that partnerships.
Councillor Haynes, can I just interrupt you? I'm sorry, but we are getting.
Yes.
Yeah, we are getting a lot of breakthrough. We're not actually hearing you. It's very intermittent and it's not really audible. And we think it's at your end. It may be. Yeah, even
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, that's very clear.
Okay, right. I've got headphones on. I wasn't using headphones before. So shall I start again, Chairman?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. And once again, good evening, members. So the paper before you is the BCP domestic abuse strategy, the aim of which is to ensure that no resident living or visiting within our council area should live in fear of or experience domestic abuse. The delivery of this strategy actually sits with the Community Safety Partnership, which was set up back in April 2019. So just for those who are not familiar with what the Community Safety Partnership are.
Sorry to interrupt you again, Councillor Haynes. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a partnership.
Councillor Haynes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Councillor Haynes, we're still having the same problem. Can I suggest that you turn off your video? It might help.
Right, Chairman, I'm going to try and move location to get a better connection at home. Hang on.
Okay, as I say, you might turn off your. Oh, you haven't got your earphones on. Can you hear me?
Right, can you hear me better here?
I can hear you, but we.
Okay, hang on 2 seconds. Can you hear me?
You're at the moment. Yeah, Councillor Haynes.
Mr. Chairman.
No, we're having problems with you, Councillor Haynes. Your internet seems to be intermittent. Could you just try turning off your video and let's just try it on audio.
Okay, is that any better?
Right, let's just start again, and if it's an improvement, we'll carry on.
Let's start again. Maybe third time lucky. Okay. So I was just talking about the domestic abuse strategy is in front of you for consideration on this agenda item, and the responsibility for delivery of the strategy sits with the Community Safety Partnership. So the Community Safety Partnership, as the name suggests, is a partnership, and it consists of various agencies the police, adult social care, children's services, the CCG, rehabilitation services, and the list goes on. So coming back to the strategy before you, this was actually developed over a period of time, and the 3 different stages of development are actually detailed in paragraphs 5 to 7 of the main report. So this is the first domestic abuse strategy, which brings together the foundations of the work within the previous legacy councils, as well as the Pan-Dorset partners. The CSP, Community Safety Partnership, they've taken this opportunity because it's a new strategy to rescale the ambition and reshape their responses for BCP Council in terms of our approach of how we would do this. So all the partners that I mentioned previously, they have worked together to consider how to secure the best outcomes, learning from experience and considering evidence of need, and looking at national best practice to actually frame the plan, the strategy that you have before you. So what is domestic abuse? So in your agenda pack, you actually have the strategy actually included, and on page, I think the actual strategy is page 6, but in your agenda is page 338. It actually defines domestic abuse as any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behavior, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who have been intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. And now this can encompass, but it's not limited to, the following types of abuse: psychological, physical, sexual, financial, or emotional. As I say, that definition is actually in the actual main strategy itself. So how do we actually aim to actually deliver on this strategy? So the CSP have actually committed to do this by co-commissioning services for which victims, perpetrators and children, to ensure required services are not only in place, but they are effective and that they respond to the multiple needs of the individuals as the case requires. It will also support criminal justice agencies to pursue perpetrators through the system and to work on changing their behaviour in order to actually break that cycle of domestic violence happening. So in the strategy document, as also included, to read my own handwriting, now this strategy was actually went before the CSP for approval way back in October. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, but actually I'm very pleased to report that at the end of the day, it was actually unanimously supported by the CSP board. Now, you will also see that included in the strategy is the domestic homicide review, which is another statutory requirement that the CSP is required to actually handle. And what a domestic homicide review is, that it looks at the circumstances in which a death of a person aged 16 years or over has or appears to have resulted from violence, abuse or neglect. And if you wanted more detail on the domestic homicide review, that can actually be found on page 343 of your agenda papers. So what I'd like to then draw members' attention to is on page 347 of your agenda paper, or page 15 as numbered on the strategy. There is an infographic of the vision and principles that will be followed to achieve the aims as I've set out previously. And then the other thing I'd like to point out to members is the governance structure for this on how it's going to be delivered, and that's actually set out on page 21 of the strategy or page 353 of your agenda papers. So Chair, as while my internet connection is working, I'm going to stop there, and I'm very happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes. Now, I'm just going to take a bit of an unusual, because of your internet issues. I just want to ask if there are any members that dissent effectively from the contents of the report, and if they do, if they could just flag those up now. It's just that we can get, you know, some a consensus before the rest of the debate. It's just in case we lose you, Councillor Haynes. So.
Councillor Bartlett, can you just clarify what you said we were dissenting or not from?
Well, just the report itself. Because the recommendation to Cabinet is that the strategy is. Let me just get the recommendation exactly. It is recommended the Cabinet approve the domestic abuse strategy, basically. So, if there are issues about the strategy that you want to raise, if you could do that. If not, in other words, if you're content with the report as it is, then we can move on to some questions and clarification. It's just in case we lose Councillor Haynes during that session. Okay, nobody's indicating. So I think what we'll do is
Councillor Howell's got his hand up, and Councillor Allison did have his hand up, but it's gone down again.
Okay, we're having a few problems tonight. I didn't see that, but I can see he's got his hand up now. So what we'll do is we'll go on to the debate, and we'll go to Councillor Howell. Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid that for me, this is the worst kind of council type report. I mean, to me, it is very worrying that this report is seeing the light of day in its current form. It's not a strategy. A strategy is a way of getting to a long-term objective, which lists actions. All this really does is just list vague commitments with no principles of measurement as to what we're trying to achieve. The report gives the impression that actually, you know, we are in mid-table if you look at the police figures across the country as far as domestic violence. And to me, this report screams, oh, we're happy with that. You know, when there are references to finance, they're usually saying, oh, we've accessed a temporary short-term fund to do this piece of work or that piece of work. For me, it starts off with this objective, which is what everybody would agree with, that nobody should be subject to domestic abuse, but that just is hanging there, and there's no. You know, that obviously is unrealistic in you know, as an aspiration anyway. But there's no realistic aspirations there. There's no way of us getting, you know, a plan for us to get further up that league table of performance. You know, and I appreciate this is a partnership report, but it's a partnership that I understand that is led by the council and the portfolio holder. So I'm really disappointed with this, and I wouldn't be, you know, I just think it would almost be a disgrace really if as a council we were to let approve something like this in this form. Thank you.
Chairman, would you like me to respond?
Please, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I take on board what Councillor Howell has said. This is a partnership report, but the nature of domestic abuse is one of those that we don't go out and actively seek. Most of the reports that actually come through of domestic violence occurring, they actually come through the police or we get intelligence. It's not something where we actually actively know where it's occurring or who is at risk. So what happens is it is actually in the plan. It is actually set out what they do. So if we have reports that there is a family, a child, an adult at risk, this will actually then go to the MAREC group, which is the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, and they will sit and they meet on a weekly basis to actually go through the list of the people that are actually under what I would call, probably the easiest way to describe it would be a watch list. So they are being monitored and action will be taken as is necessary. Now, I agree with Councillor Howe that perhaps that doesn't make it 100% clear, but again, we've got our 4 priorities and how we would actually work through the priorities. And a lot of this is actually, as I say, done with the police, because in most instances, it would be the police that would actually be informed, they would get a call, and then they will attend. And depending on the circumstances of the situation, they will then contact the other partners within the CSP. And then a plan will actually be drawn up as to how to actually deal with that particular case. It's a situation where it's not a one-size-fits-all. The service is provided on the basis of what the situation is and what the needs of those the victims, as well as the perpetrators. The circumstances have to be assessed and the appropriate service and help provided. So I hope that kind of clarifies for Councillor Howe that actually the plan, it is in the plan, but we cannot be very, very prescriptive about it simply because of the nature of the issue we're dealing with here. The plan has to be drawn up on a case-by-case basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just come back on that? I think it's not unfair to just kind of offload so much onto the police. Obviously, the police's responsibility is primarily to, to deal with the criminal element of it. But as a council, surely we are responsible for such things as trying to increase the amount of refuge accommodation, making sure that resources are invested in kind of prevention and education as well in terms of offenders. Surely that is a big part of reducing ongoing offences. I just think the report refers to a process that included a SWOT analysis, but we've not been given an opportunity to see what the results of that SWOT analysis is. I would have expected to see that in the report because, we currently haven't got sight of where the weaknesses that were identified are, where the threats are. We're very much just presented here with a wish list of desired outcomes. Thank you.
Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, it's just to say on the finance, it's actually included in the main report under the summary of financial implications, where a sum of 425,000 is actually available, and that money is actually to provide for 2 refuges outreach services to support victims. And Councillor Howe mentioned about raising awareness. Now that is something that we will do, but again, it's one of those we have to be quite sensitive how we do this because of the nature of the issue. It's not something that we can do in the same way as we would advertise, I don't know, green bins, for example, because the nature of it is different. But we are making people who we think may be at risk, we are making them aware so that should they have an issue, then they will know how to report it.
Thank you, Councillor. I need to move on. We've got quite a few people that wish to speak. Now, again, the hand thing is not working, but we've now, the list I've now got is Councillor Allison, followed by Councillor Dedman, followed by Councillor Earl, Councillor Kelsey, and then Councillor Slade. So that's the order I'm going to go in. Councillor Allison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my first point wasn't going to be that dissimilar to what Councillor Howell's just raised. I completely share his sentiments that the document has got a lot of content which nobody could find disagreeable, but it is a lot of high-level language that doesn't really show us how we're going to help achieve any of those objectives. I understand what Councillor Haynes is saying about because of the nature of the issue, it's difficult, but the document does refer to a delivery plan which is going to be developed. Is there not some way where there could be that delivery plan could be altered in some way to make it acceptable for being brought in front of this board so that we could see more specifically what the council are doing? Because as we were saying earlier, it is obviously a joint venture to tackle this issue, but the council does have a leading role and a responsibility to make sure that we're keeping people safe. My second point is that this document doesn't really seem to reflect what's happened over the past year with coronavirus. So we've seen on this document that between the last year and this year, we've seen a 32% rise in domestic abuse cases. I would expect there to be another raise, and I'm not sure how big it will be because of the nature of coronavirus and people staying at home, etc. So how is this document and how is the delivery plan that's to come going to reflect the impact of coronavirus on domestic abuse? Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Yeah, go
Chair,
ahead.
did you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in response to, thank Councillor Allison for the points he's raised. So in response to his point, it is to say he's already said that it is actually a joint initiative with various other agencies, and this is new. This is a starting point. So with any updates, I'm very happy to actually bring it back to ONS if that you would find that helpful. So in terms of the COVID and how it has actually impacted on domestic abuse, back in April, I think a domestic abuse COVID response was actually approved, and now obviously we found ourselves, we went into lockdown, and then we're now in tier 2. So we also we're working on joint communication with the police and partners, and we're using the hashtag You're Not Alone to actually promote awareness for domestic abuse. So in terms of numbers, I mentioned the Marek update. So just for information, between April and June of this year, 2020, there were 188 cases were heard, averaging 14 per week. Between July to September, 219, so that has gone up, averaging 17 per week. And interestingly enough, in October, there were 79 cases, averaging 16 per meeting. So it went down ever so slightly, but it's still a concerning number. And the latest figure I have is that in the first 2 weeks of November, there were 40 cases with 20 per week. So that's actually gone up. And hence the strategies are really important, that we need to agree this so that we can start to work in earnest to actually try and bring the numbers down. And as Councillor Allison is saying, you know, what has the impact of COVID done? We've been aware that obviously in the first lockdown, people who would normally be spending so much time at home, if there were already growing tensions, that it would actually make it worse. But that didn't actually play out. But it's starting to actually hit now that we've got winter, the days are drawing in. And again, because we're in tier 2, people are not able to actually go out as freely as they could before. So this is something that we will be keeping a very, very close eye on, particularly over this period. And in general, when we get to the festive season, it may sound a bit perverse, but you do get increase in cases simply because of the time of year. So I acknowledge that, yes, you know, there are issues, cases are on the rise, but we are keeping very, very close watch on the situation.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Allison, I'd like to move on if I may. Councillor Dedman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm taking a slightly different view on this. I'm not going to call it a report. I think it's much more of a framework. And I do know from my previous experience that this has been a huge task to bring all these people, to try to get them collaborating, to work together. And the other thing I really want to say now is that domestic abuse, it used to be thought of as a woman rushing about with a black eye and husband with the frying pan or whatever. I'm not trying to make it a funny subject, but it was very much a physical thing. And there is a huge amount more to it now. It involves so much more, and we are so much more aware of the abuse that people suffer, which has nothing to do with black eyes and anything like that. I think this is a good report as a framework, as a start, as a work in progress rather, or a process. I would like obviously to see a lot more detail, but there's a lot of detail that you can't actually go into. Every case would be different. It would be like saying you want the detail of how you care for a person in their home. Every instance is different. I would support the report. I think there's been a huge amount of work. There is still a huge amount of work to do, and it's a huge subject, safeguarding, a massive issue, and we have to take it very seriously. But having said that, I'm quite content with the report, or not the report, with the work in progress. I don't think that we need facts and figures particularly for this situation. And yes, as I say, I think a lot of work has gone into it, and I don't want to in any way denigrate the officers who have done a huge amount of work. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. Could we now move on to Councillor Earl, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Alongside Councillor Howe, this is quite vague, but what this paper has really done for me is left me shocked at how inadequate it feels the services are in BCP in preventing and tackling domestic abuse. You know, particularly the lack of accommodation available and the use of bed and breakfast accommodation. That particularly jumped out at me. Having no provision for those with substance abuse issues, and only a single bed for a male, and also the general lack of ambition and action in the strategy to address those kinds of issues. And I appreciate that you clarified for Councillor Howe, Councillor Haynes, that you clarified for Councillor Howe. I would have liked to have that to have been in the strategy a bit more, or alongside it for us to consider, so there was more of a context. But it also highlights some of the negative sides of maybe agency working or multi-agency working in this case. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of accountability on tackling these issues, or say who's responsible in its action or improvements, or how even success will be measured once this strategy is adopted, or whether it's the CSP or individual agencies' responsibility on certain areas of action. I'm genuinely worried about what Cabinet adopting this means for people suffering domestic abuse across BCP. And I would actually, I mean, I don't know if it's a recommendation yet, but I do think there needs to be a lot more work done around this by the CSP and maybe some other agencies before Cabinet can actually approve it. So more feedback there, and a bit of shock really, than an actual question, but I felt I really needed to say it. Thank you.
Councillor Earl, did you want to respond to that, Councillor Hayes, before we move on to the next speaker?
Just a couple of very quick comments, Chairman. I thank Councillor Dedman for her comments, and also Councillor Earl, that we have got two refuges that are situated within the BCP conurbation, and we're very conscious that one of them may not be as fit for purpose as we would like it to be. So part of the plan further down the line would be that we will be looking at either a better provision or an extra provision. But again, it's work in progress. But I thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Kelsey, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got a few points, if I may. I'll run through them, and then Councillor Haynes can possibly come back if she can and answer any of them or give me any leads on it. Outcomes. Where are the outcomes attached to see if the strategy we have are actually going to be effective? What are your targets, and how will they get men, for instance, in heterosexual relationships to start reporting more? They don't go to the police. They're scared to a lot of the time. They don't like to be embarrassed. The only people they go to is their doctor when they get beaten up by their female or male partner, whatever may be. Then the health department report it. They don't go to the police and report it, never have done, never will do. And we need to do something about that. You say on paragraph 23 of this report, or under summary of equality implications, gay men and bisexual men experience more domestic abuse compared to those in heterosexual relationships. So do gay women. No mention of them in this report. Why not? I'd hardly find that equal. And I'm quite disappointed in this report, really. I have to say, there's not a great deal of detail in it. And I can't see how we're going to measure what you're trying to get out of this. I really fail to see how that's going to come about. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Councillor Haynes?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I thank Councillor Kelsey for his comments. Outcomes, that's a very good point that you've raised. Again, because it's not something that we can gauge, we can predict how many cases we will see, but I think it's the number of the outcomes will be being able to help the victims as well as the perpetrators to actually move on. So if we can help them move on in as quick a time as is possible, provide them with the support that they need, that would be one of the measures of our outcome there. So therefore, with targets, that again is a moving feast. So heterosexual relationships, they talk to their GP. So we also have the CCG, and we have health colleagues that actually form part of the who are part of the partnership, and they will actually be able to make referrals either directly to the council or to the police. Similar, if someone were to go to a hospital, if there was any suspected domestic abuse, they would actually make the referral on to the relevant, either, as I say, the council or to the police, and action will then be taken forward from there.
Councillor Kelsey, you wanted to come back.
If I may, Chairman.
If you could briefly, please.
I will briefly, Chairman. Councillor Haynes, there's no mention of same-sex marriage in this. You say about heterosexual people. What about same-sex couples? How do they report things? Very often they won't. They're still underground with a lot of them. As free and easy as this wonderful conurbation of ours is, there are still a hell of a lot of same-sex relationships that go unreported to anyone. A lot of people are still in the closet. I see no preference here for how we can get to those people. There is no gay scene as such anymore in this town or in this area. How are you going to get those people to report things? I'm sorry if I'm going on, but as you know, this is very important to the likes of myself and certain other members in this panel tonight. And I feel we're being a bit underdone on this.
I thank you for that comment, Councillor Kelsey, and that was an oversight. But the strategy covers everybody, irrespective of their sexual orientation.
Councillor Haynes?
So yes. So I would say that was. So I apologise that was an oversight.
Oversight should not be sent to us on a panel of this, on a paper of this nature. They should be there in black and white. You should never have brought this paper if it's not complete.
All right, thank you, Councillor Kelsey.
Sorry, Chairman.
That's okay. Councillor Slade, and that then followed by Councillor Fear. And I think that it looks as if we're moving towards some recommendations of some sort. So if anyone is minded to make a recommend, if they could start working on that, so we can.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. That's pretty much where I was. I absolutely have huge respect for the fact that this is a multi-agency paper. And when I was briefly on the Community Safety Partnership, I was very, very clear that we are only one of those members. So I think it's absolutely right that we acknowledge this multi-agency strategy. What I'm really disappointed about, and actually pretty angry on behalf of the whole host of our residents, is that the council's bit, the covering paper, is so inadequate. You know, we have got to have outcomes. It's got to be measurable. I totally understand that we can't control this, but we can't control a lot of the areas that we expect our teams to be measurable on. There's nothing on here about target hardening. There's nothing on here about repeat victims, nothing about pattern breaking behaviours of victims, nothing about mental health, nothing about education. And the comment about it's not like advertising a green bin is pretty offensive. Although I would say that historically, we used to have signs on the backs of doors telling people they weren't alone. So you can do stuff, but there's nothing in the paper. There's very little in the paper about people who don't have English as a first language, people who are culturally very isolated. So my suggestion is that we acknowledge this strategy, but that we send it back for Cabinet to actually require a full delivery paper of what the council are going to do and what we can measure, because I don't want to be responsible for waving this through and then we are held accountable for the fact that this really is inadequate. I read this, I was so disappointed because I know that there's lots of well-meaning people in there, and I know that different agencies have different ways of being accountable, but we are accountable direct to the public, and this paper is not good enough. So my suggestion is that we either send it back or that we acknowledge the paper as a multi-agency paper, and we ask the council to go back and do more work on the areas that the council can influence.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Haynes, did you want to come back on that? Just before you come back, I've noted that Kelly Ansell is asking to speak, and maybe you'd like to invite her to talk after you if you needed to, Councillor Haynes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can make some comments first, and then perhaps Kelly Ansell can come in thereafter. This is a multi-agency paper, and if we were to make any changes to it, it will have to go back to the CSP for approval, which would actually then delay the paper and the strategy. So I personally wouldn't want to see this delayed, simply because it is a very important aspect that we as a council need to be dealing with and taking actions on. But I take on board the points that Councillor Slade has raised, that it is a multi-agency paper, and to get so many agencies to actually agree on a paper is no mean feat, and we've actually got there. So at this point, perhaps Kelly Ansell might want to make some comments. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Kelly Ansell, would you like to come in now? And I recognise that Councillor Fear, you're waiting. Hope you don't mind if Kelly comes in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I hope I can provide some reassurance to members. Thank you for the comments and the feedback that's been received. Obviously, this strategy has been developed through a particularly difficult period of time. And with coronavirus very much a factor in what happens around circumstances relating to domestic abuse. I just wanted to clarify to members that we've had a domestic abuse response plan specific to the circumstances around COVID. So that is separate to this strategy, but certainly feeds into it also. There is an incredible amount of detail that goes into this strategy, and perhaps isn't well reflected in how it's been presented. But I did want to assure members that the next stage of this and the next phase is the development of a delivery plan. So this sets the high-level principles that we want to work to as a community safety partnership to reach that vision. The next stage is that delivery plan, which will include those deliverables and those outcomes, and consider some of those aspects in that we've already discussed tonight in much more detail. Obviously, this is a very complex matter. There are many different aspects. I take on board Councillor Kelsey's points, but I can assure you that those needs and that information has been considered in the development of these high-level principles. What we now need to do is move that forward to a delivery plan, which I would be more than happy to come back to overview and scrutiny to discuss with you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for another really good debate. I think it's been really good. I couldn't say that as much, unfortunately, about the paper, even though thank you, Kelly Ansell, for your explanation. Just I think that's cleared up a few of my points, especially around point 22, 23 and 24. I felt it was a letdown for a lot of people. I'm just trying to find a way forward now, Chair, with this. Do we, you know, as some have suggested, reject this, or do we note it, or do we pass this with a guarantee that the cabinet member will come back with the reassurance of fulfilling the points Councillor Kelsey has raised, for example, and possibly others, and with the backing of Kelly Ansell as well. I don't know if that would be a way forward, but I'd like to know what others think, because I feel it's a good start. It doesn't go far enough, but I understand the next steps will be vital in this. So I'd like to take your steer and others on this, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. My take on that, there's clearly some issues with the strategy paper, but on the other hand, we're being told that to stop its progress would give problems generally. One suggestion has been that the strategy is noted, but it requires a follow-up delivery, a detailed delivery plan to be associated with it. Now, whether that could form some kind of recommendation, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's down for members to make a recommendation if that's what they want to do. I see Councillor Kelsey has got his hand up, but before I come to you, please, Councillor Kelsey, and if you've got some thoughts on that, could you just write something down? But Councillor Filer is also on the list. Thank you. Councillor Filer.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think, if I understood what Kelly was saying, I think it's important this report is accepted tonight, but I really take the point that many have made, particularly one or two of the points that Councillor Slade made about what the council should be doing. This is a multi-agency report, and we wouldn't want to hold it up for all the other agencies by rejecting this report tonight. But I'd like to think that this will come back to the council with a much fuller, description of what we plan to do for this, because it's such an important issue, and it becomes very bland when it's watered down by so many different people inputting. I might be wrong, and I think perhaps Kelly can answer that. If it were rejected tonight, would it put everything back for a long time? But myself, I agree that there's not enough in it. There's not enough detail, and I think BCP should be the leaders, not the followers, in something so important as this. And so we can show the way by doing more, not just doing the minimum, because it's a sort of amalgamation of so many different points of view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Someone has actually, I'll come back to you just in a second, Councillor Kelsey. It's been suggested that the recommendation could be changed to the Cabinet note the strategy rather than approve it. That way we would note it. You're not necessarily approving the strategy. That is potentially one way. But before we come on to that, Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think that this report needs to go away. I think us agreeing with this report tonight will cause us more problems than what it would if we went away for a cycle of meetings, whilst both Kelly, who I have huge respect for, and she knows it, puts what she thinks into this report. We need some form of how we're going to achieve these outcomes. It's all well and good having a report in front of us, but there is absolutely no tangible way whatsoever that we can see at this moment in time as to how we're going to reach these targets or anything. And I appreciate more than anyone else, you really don't know how much, that this is a multi-agency report. But I am sure as a member of BCP that I don't want to put anything through that is going to make us look ridiculous and stupid amongst these other members of this working group. We all have to put in exactly what we think. If I'm thinking like this, I'm sure there are other members on this panel tonight that are equally feeling that way. I would much rather get a good, robust piece of work in front of us, even if it means we have to have an extra meeting to get this through after this month's cycle. I would much rather do that. This is so, so important for us as human beings, for people's religious context, everything. It is such a huge piece of work. And to come in tonight with a 5 or 6 page piece of paper in my eyes, I'm sorry, Councillor Haynes, but it's rubbish.
Right. Just
so I would recommend, Chairman, that we send this back away to be rewritten and come back to us at another time.
I'm happy to second that proposal.
Okay, before you do that, I've already received one recommendation in the chat bar before you've made that.
Sorry, Chairman.
And it's from Councillor Howell, who says he recommends that the multi-agency report be approved in principle, but on the condition that the report is not published until it is updated pursuant to councillor comments and a delivery plan is attached to it and approved by the Cabinet Oblique Council. Would that meet your aspirations?
No, Chairman.
No, okay.
No.
Okay, does anybody wish to second the proposal made by Councillor Howell?
Chair, I think first, I mean, because there is a more radical proposal being put forward, I think it's probably fair that that one is considered first.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Howell.
Okay, so would you like to put some words on that?
I'm no good with words. I'm a thicko.
All right, well, maybe you're second.
Chairman, in that case, I would recommend that this report is duly noted, but we would recommend that it is rewritten and represented to this panel at a future date, at the earliest possible future date, with more clarification within it.
Okay, that's the recommendation. Councillor Slade?
I'm happy to second that.
Second that. Okay, does anybody want to talk to that motion? I don't think anybody has indicated.
Yeah, I put my hand up.
Oh, you did. Sorry, Councillor House, go on.
Yeah, I just think maybe we should just add some of the things that we'd like to see in that report. So I'd like to see the SWOT analysis in that report, and some other people may have other things that they wish to see, and some, yeah. So I'll open it up to the floor.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Howell, thank you for that. I'd like to see some outcomes, or how we're going to achieve our outcomes, how we're going to get our message out to people, how we're going to help people to contact people with regards to this. People in domestic violence, for example, do not go out running around the sheep saying, my husband's beating me up. How are we going to get this information? I don't see much about how that's going to happen. Not everyone talks to the people that we expect them to. They don't always go to their doctors, etc. How are we going to try and find out more of this information? And I think that's key to the whole aspect of this paper, is how people get to report things.
Okay. Anybody else wish to say anything? Oh, Councillor Millie Earl, I think you've indicated.
Thank you. I completely agree that this paper isn't good enough, exactly as I said as well. But I wonder if we need to be careful about what's going to be in the delivery paper and what's going to be in this. So maybe waiting to have them both together or something, because it's almost like there's two papers. They want to achieve different things, but we need to know what's in each of them to be able to decide if one's good enough or if both are good enough or not at all. So I just wanted to throw that out there if anyone else thought that waiting for the delivery paper as well would be helpful in knowing what's going to be in the strategy paper.
I think just generally, I mean, I really ought to be giving this to Councillor Haynes, but generally a strategy paper would then follow by detailed plans that implement the strategy that's been agreed. I don't think they always come together. They don't necessarily have to come together. But Councillor Haynes, would you like to comment on that?
Chair, thank you for all the comments from members so far. The delivery plan is being worked on. We actually have a CSP meeting later this week, so I will feed back all the comments that have actually been made from this panel to the CSP. As I explained before, if the board were to say they do not want to approve, they said they would happy to note the strategy, that's fine. But if you wanted the actual strategy to be changed, that will actually have to go through a cycle with the CSP, which Kelly will probably be able to advise on the timescale. So that would add some delay. But I think our work will still continue in terms of domestic abuse, because the work cannot just stop. And so I think if the board were minded to say you would note the report and we would come back at a later stage, at the earliest possible stage, with the delivery plan when it is available, then I'm very happy to give the assurance that that would happen.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Haynes. We have Councillor Filer wishing to speak, followed by Councillor Fear, and then Councillor Allison, and then Kelly Ansell wants to come back in again. But you know, time is really getting on now, and if you wouldn't mind, if you could make your comments as brief as possible, please. Thank you. So we've got Councillor Filer. Thank you.
My hand went down, Chairman, because the point was made by someone else, so you gain yourself a few moments.
Thank you so much. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. I will be as brief as possible. Just wanted to double check that the religious and cultural aspects of this will be included in the paper going forward, and also because of how the paper did brush over advertising this going forward to members of the public, it'd be great to see, and especially on this sort of issue, ideas and thoughts of a soft campaign about raising the awareness and how people can find help and support, or a soft campaign or a hard campaign, and what the merits are in both, and see what would work well. And if there are any examples from other local authorities around the country, that would be, I think, really, really helpful in this situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Councillor Haynes.
Yep, I take on board those comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allison.
Yeah, mine was just in response to what we'd like to see. So I think in the delivery plan, it's very important that alongside the outcomes, it's very specific about which partner of the CSP is responsible for delivering each of the outcomes, because obviously it's a partnership, but I'd like to see specifically who's responsible for making sure the action has been achieved.
Okay, so that's in the delivery plan, but not necessarily in the strategy paper. So, Kelly Ansell.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. If I may, I think that it would be appropriate to consider delaying the Cabinet consideration of this report, given the comments this evening. And actually, I think what we can do is by delaying it by just a couple of months. We do have the option to meet with we meet with the CSP on a monthly basis, so I don't see any particular issues in terms of any of the delay that would cause. But what we can do is come back with not only this high-level strategy, but also the delivery plan before it goes to Cabinet for full consideration once it's come back to this committee.
Well, that seems a very reasonable suggestion. Would somebody like to make that recommendation? Councillor Kelsey?
Yep, I would, Chairman. I think that's a very good recommendation. I thank Kelly for that. I know it's not always easy when you've written the report for someone like me to come along and abuse it and slate it, and I really appreciate her words there in saying that she'd be happy to do that. So I fully support that move, Chairman.
And do we have a
I second that, Chair.
Okay, all right, Councillor Mark, I'll second that.
Can I just make a point, because I had my hand up very quickly, is that I think it's a bit artificial, this separation between you have to prepare the strategy and then the delivery. You can't prepare the delivery plan until you've got the strategy. We know 90% of the strategy, and I think I welcome Kelly's statement that actually those two can be brought together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, then we did have a previous move from Councillor Kelsey before we've got to this one. So I guess we ought to ask you, Councillor Kelsey, are you prepared to take your original move away?
I am indeed, Chairman, thank you. And I would quite happily go along with the suggestion made by Ms Kelly Ansell.
Okay, so the recommendation now then is that the report, and of course we are this report is due to go to Cabinet. I'm not quite sure how we handle it, whether we just agree that it is that we accept the deferment, or whether we have to recommend to Cabinet. I suggest that we probably have to accept that that it's been agreed that it will be deferred and will not go to Cabinet. Is that acceptable? Could I ask Democratic Services if that's right?
Chairman, it's Councillor Haynes here. If that is the general feeling of the board, which clearly it is, then I'm happy to defer the paper pending that Democratic Services says that that is actually acceptable.
Okay. Susan's eyes, I'm sorry that I know that you're about to leave. Is it possible you could answer that question before you go?
Yes, I'm still here, Chairman. That's absolutely fine. I think it's up to Cabinet as to whether or not they wish to defer this paper. As you all know, it is a big consideration that has been through scrutiny and what scrutiny might recommend, but that doesn't prohibit Cabinet from continuing to consider the matter. Hearing what Councillor Hayes has said and what Kelly has offered, I should imagine that Cabinet may decide to defer the paper, which they can do as well, but that would be their decision.
Would it not be for the portfolio holder herself to make that decision if she doesn't wish to present it to Cabinet?
Yes, well, absolutely, but that's what I meant, Cabinet in the general sense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I think we can move forward if Councillor Hayes is prepared to accept a deferment to get the paper rewritten to accommodate all the things that we've discussed tonight, then I think that's a way forward. So if there's no dissent to that, we can agree that and move on. Okay, that is agreed then, and we'll draw that discussion to a conclusion.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman, Councillor Dedman, can I abstain? If you were taking a vote there, which wasn't clear, can I abstain on that? Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't taking a vote. I was looking for any dissent. But if if you wish to dissent, then we will have to take a vote.
Oh, okay. Don't know. All right, then I won't.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that does conclude that item. The next item, I'm required to advise the members that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. I move therefore to go below the line for this agenda item. Does the meeting agree? Or is there any dissent from that?
Agreed. Need a proposer and seconder, Councillor Bartlett.
There's no dissent, there's no need. So there is no dissent, so we're obviously all in agreement. So for the members of the public now, we will close the live stream for this part of the meeting. Thank you for bearing with us and listening to some really interesting debate, and thank you for joining with us. So Democratic Services, if you'd be kind enough to close the live stream now, and we'll move on with the next item. So if you can